Okay, so welcome, and I know this is during the lunch break. Hopefully you didn't eat before because, this stuff kind of gets a little dry, but not when I give it. So let's talk about Masonic demographics, and let's go to the next slide. The first thing I want to mention is that, as with all data, metrics, and all that, think of them as like the check engine light on your dashboard, right? That it's not telling you what's wrong with your engine, it's just telling you you might want to look in this area, okay? So when we see trends, the data is just the data, but you really need to explore it, talk to brothers, and to figure out really what's going on behind the data, okay? So we can only extrapolate, but we really need to dig deeper. Next slide. Yep. So how many of you are familiar with the Masonic Services Association of North America? Every year they publish out per Grand Lodge what their total number of membership is. Next. And if you notice, if you plot those out into a graph, some interesting trends occur, right? We can see we had a peak in the 20s and 30s. We dipped down a little bit in the late 30s, early 40s, rose to a total of like 4.7 million members in 1959, which was our peak, and have been on the steady decline since, right? And so I've been worried about what's been going on with that decline. That has been a steady decline since 1959, right? And no one's done anything about this? Like, this is a long trend, and it's pretty much a flat slope. So if you try to extrapolate that, put all this into Excel 2016 will let you do trending. So given all this previous data, where might it go? Here are a couple scenarios of where it might trend to. What I'm curious in looking at is, when does it get to zero? If that line is steadily approaching zero, what's our death date? Right? I kind of want to know that. And so forecasting out, if you go next, the green line is kind of the general sense, and then there might be a best case and a worst case. So next. Maybe, wait for it.
Sorry guys, having a little bit of computer trouble here.
Right. Okay.
I wish.
Mm-hmm.
I'd love to.
So while he's doing that, you can see that the green line trends to zero right around 2040. So if current trends continue, that means that the fraternity, as we know, will be dead. Now, hopefully, many of us in the room will live past 2040. But you can see that certainly the trend is saying that's kind of where, if given current membership and current death rates exist, that's where we're going. Okay. Best case is that top line, and but worst case is somewhere in 2027, so about 10 years. That's a worst case scenario. Okay. Any questions so far? Yes. Sure.
Is this U.S. geography?
Correct. This is all the data collected by the Masonic Services Association, which is only data collected from the Grand Secretaries at the Conference of the Grand Masters. Okay? So, next up. I wanted to unpack that. This is data that's collected over the past 2 or 3 years, and looking at just from the year 2000 until 2013, okay, where are we gaining members and how is that broken out? Digging through a lot of archives across a good selection size of the Grand Lodges, I found that big spiky red line, that's our new members, our raised members, or our new members in Pennsylvania. Even though it spikes up and down, thank you, one-day conferrals, the trend line that dotted line between that is actually pretty flat. So regardless of one-day conferrals, the overall trend, the impact it's having to the fraternity is relatively flat. And you can kind of see the affiliates and the reinstateds. Next slide. Let's look at the loss numbers. So lower is worse, and you want it to get better, closer to zero. The death rate was really fascinating because we were really losing a lot of members to death, at least in the year 2000. But that trend line is looking really well. The good news is we're dying slower. And I think that's mostly due to, remember the peak of membership that we got in 1959? Unfortunately, they're dying off, but who came in after that are still living on, okay? So we can't really fix much about death. We really can't do much. Expulsions are really low, which is good. And demits are voluntary, and sometimes those are hard to track because you may be demitting from one jurisdiction when you move to another jurisdiction. You really can't see what the data is going on there. But next, the thing that's bothering me the most is what is happening here in the suspensions, non-payment of dues, or on Masonic conduct. Every Grand Lodge tracks it differently, but generally this is in your non-payment of dues. These are the current members who just aren't following up and who are fading away. Next. So in 2016, that's a little dated now, but on the podcast I said we really need to do something about this. I would like to collect some data about who we are, because this is just telling numbers. It's not telling anything about what our likes, dislikes are, anything like that. So a few of you help contribute to that. Next. And this is the data that we got out. You can see that I was a little bit worried about selection bias in statistics, where, you know, if I only ask my mother what my opinion of me is, she'll love me. So I wanted to make sure I had a nice breadth of representation. So this is a histogram of all the different ages of those who responded. And so it's good to see a wide standard deviation with an average age of 45 years old who responded. So, and even this 93-year-old out here too, which is really good to see. Next. So let's dig into that data. Next. Okay, so of those who responded, we had a large percentage that responded who were of Gen X and Gen Y. And again, there is a little bit of selection bias in there. We do know that those who would fill out an online survey probably, you know, aren't of the older generation. But this is the breakout of what we had. Next. Marital status. This was interesting in the fact of all those who responded, almost 73% of them were married, which is good because, you know, we like to say we're a family-oriented fraternity. And comparing that data to national average, as of 2006, only 55% of Americans age 18 and over were married. So it's good that we tend to attract married men into our fraternity, which is good. Next. Do you have children? May or may not be related to the previous question, but 70% of us have children as well. Again, reemphasizing this family-oriented fraternity that we have. Next. Also wanted to see what the retirement age. Do we have a lot of old retirees? Do we have people who are working citizens? And again, it might be skewed because of the Gen Xers and Gen Yers who responded, but you can see there's a lot. 86% of the fraternity are still working, are still employed in some fashion, right? With only 14%. I couldn't get numbers, accurate numbers of what the national average of retirees to working class is, but I thought this was interesting that we've all got jobs. We got day jobs. We got stuff to do. So we have to be mindful of that when we are working with our brothers, asking them to come to lodge events, right? I got to work tomorrow. Next. I did ask the salary range, which I found to be interesting too. Again, this is the cool part about the survey is I wasn't affiliated with any Grand Lodge. I just said, can you help a brother out? And I asked some questions about religion, politics, money, and all that. So you'll get to see some cool things here. As far as salary, it was interesting to see that most of the Masons really make between 25K and 75K. Right? So we're not the elitists anymore, right? We have data to show we're not the Bilderberg group. You know, we're not running the U.S. government. You know, we're trying to figure out, you know, so when you're trying to think about maybe even TO lodge movements, right? If they want to charge a lot more for dues, you know, this may or may not impact the financial impact to the brothers themselves. Sure. Question. Mm-hmm.
Am I reading that right? That 10% of our brothers make less than $25,000?
Yes. Yeah, 0 to 25, and there are a lot of students in that makeup. Good question. Sure.
And was this respondents from your survey?
Correct. This is all data right out of the survey. Yep. Okay. Next. Being a very patriotic system that we have here in the United States, I wanted to see how many of us are veterans. And so, surprisingly, 3 out of every 4 Masons are not a veteran of the United States. You can see the breakout of the services in the other colors. Comparing that to the national average and selecting just for men, the United States has about 14% of its population as veterans. So, although only 1 out of 4 members of our fraternity are veterans, that's still almost twice what the national average is. So our fraternity attracts not only married men with children, but also veterans as well. Fascinating. Next. Right about the time that I had put the survey together, there was a lot going on with Grand Lodges making statements about homosexuality and that kind of thing. So I said, well, why not ask, right? It's an anonymous survey. Out of that, about 3.5% or so were either, were non-heterosexual, right? Homosexual or bisexual. And that was interesting because comparing it to the national statistics, according to the recent, surveys, which can always be skewed, in the United States, only about 3.5% are gay or bi. So it is consistent with that, and you'll see later on that if Grand Lodges make a big stink out of this, it's really chasing a small percentage of some of the other issues that we have. Right? Next. What's your preferred party affiliation? Let's talk about religion and politics. Yes. As I've taken the survey, this was before the recent election. The fascinating thing I found out of this is out of all the respondents total, only half were either Republican or Democrat. Half of our fraternity is something else, classifies themselves as something else. Right? So religion and politics being a lodge, it's kind of a weird thing, but it's fascinating to see that that we really are, we're multispectral, right? And I think it's fascinating because is that an outcome of us being a fraternity that values free thought? It's for further interrogation. Next. With what religion do you identify? We're largely Protestant, 60% Protestant. And then I saw this orange slice over here, which was 17.5% Catholic. Now, so if any of you are familiar with the relationship that Catholicism and Freemasonry have had over the past couple of years, it's interesting. And what's cool is that, again, comparing it to national averages of those who are religious, 20% of the United States population identifies as Catholic. So we're consistent, if nothing else. So in other words, these relationships that Catholicism has with Freemasonry have not really impeded its participation and membership. Also in the respondents, we had about 2.7% agnostic, a couple deists, and a few atheists. So interesting.
I was wondering about that last one.
Yep. Question.
There's no Islam on that. Was that no respondents?
It was statistically insignificant. We had a few, but yes. Thank you. Next. But I wanted to compare with the cool part about this data is all the questions were asked individually, so I can now do like a pivot table and really do some analysis by filtering things down and sorting them. So if I look at the boomers in the previous slide, generally overall 60% were Protestant. Now we're up to 70% of the baby boomers. And next, comparing that to the youngest generation, Gen Y, only 50% were Protestant. A good growing group in the Catholic group, and then a spectrum of everything else. Because I'm really been fascinating with where the trends are for, again, if we're trying to target the younger demographic to carry on, to make us last longer than 2040, how do they identify spiritually, right? And if those are requirements for joining this fraternity, we have to be considerate of what are our values, what do we actually want to draw as a hard and fast line for what defines monotheism or belief in a supreme being, all the way in the back.
Was deism one of the categories you had on the form, or did people fill in other and you categorized it under deism?
Good question. I picked a lot of the common categories that were used in like most polls and online polls. Yeah, so I did have an other section, but I used the kind of the top 10 most popular ones. Right. Thank you.
Was there anything Eastern Orthodox in there by any chance?
There were a few. I do remember seeing a few people that did other and selected that.
Is that same as Islam then, basically?
Same thing. Yep. Thank you. A few pagans and Wiccans in there too, which is fascinating. Next. For those of you kind of in behavioral studies, there's Myers-Briggs types indicator. Yeah. Oh, a few of you knew it. Okay, good. So this is really kind of cool that if you really step back and look at the extroverts versus the introverts, 1 out of every 10 Masons is an INTJ. Which is cool, because let me read you a little description of what these INTJs are. INTJs, well, rules, limitations, and traditions are shunned to the INTJ personality type. Everything should be open to questioning and reevaluation, and if they see a way, INTJs will often act unilaterally to enact their technically superior, sometimes insensitive, and almost always unorthodox methods and ideas. That's 1 out of every 10 of your brothers. All right, which is hopeful, right? We want to try new things and really ask, why has it always been done that way? Yes?
I think it's interesting backdrop of this data is do you recall what portion of the general population are INTJs?
I did not, I don't have that comparison, but it's easy to find. It's less than 3%. Are you an ITJ? Okay.
Thanks, Ernie.
Yes. There's the introvert, everyone. No. Good. Next. Sure.
Few years ago, the Masonic thing where you went to the Revolution, leadership, course, what we had. ENTJ is also one of the lowest percentages, but I noticed it's like 8% up there almost, which is high compared to the average populace.
That's interesting. Yeah, I mean, we do have a lot of extroverts in the top, membership numbers. Yeah. Really, I couldn't tell. You speaking up out of turn. Good. We found the extrovert, everyone. All right, so what? Okay, so if you wanted to paint a broad brush picture of the average Mason, we're male, thankfully, 31 to 59, married with children, employed, making 25 to 100K or so, non-veteran, Protestant extrovert. But remember, this is just your cookie cutter Mason. You have to take this as the first level of data because we all know dealing with every single person individually one-on-one is more important. But that's just the first step. Next up, let's talk about what they're interested in Freemasonry. Next. Okay, I wanted to see what age were you when you were initiated? Were you older, younger? And so overall, between 28% and then plus 36% were initiated rather young, under 36. Again, the cool part of this data is, well, I can break that out and see generationally, was one generation used to joining earlier or later. So next, I wanted to compare, what are the baby boomers like? Whoa, wait a minute. 29% of baby boomers were initiated around the ages of 47 to 56. Okay, so what do we do with that? Let's do the math. So that means that around 1993 would have been the earliest cohort of these baby boomers joining, around 47. Okay, so we've had a large increase in baby boomers joining in the late 90s. Now, they've probably gone through the lodge. They've probably done some district level things. They might be in your Grand Lodge leadership right now. And so I would have loved to have seen the data to look back and see what values did they have coming in and how did that influence their decisions and now rules and edicts that they're impacting for the fraternity today. But I just don't have that data, but I just found it to be fascinating when I was able to filter the data. Mm-hmm.
How does the change from 21 to 18 a few years back affect the data itself?
All right. That is at a jurisdictional level. The question was, how does the difference between joining at 21 or joining at 18 make a difference? We just don't have that data. And plus, I was looking, cross jurisdiction, not just specifically to, say, Massachusetts, for example.
Well, I know there's a lot of jurisdictions that have done the same change. I was just curious.
I have no clue. Thank you. All right. Next. I wanted to see how long did it take you to get your fellowcraft degree in Virginia. You just don't automatically progress. You do have to do some work. But most jurisdictions, 1 month later, you become a fellowcraft. I'm glad to see that there are still some people that wait a year to move up. Next. Same thing for Master Mason next month. So boom, in 2 months after you have your initiation, you can become a Master Mason. Be entitled to all the secrets, good to go. Right? Interesting. Next. Another thing I asked was, well, so how many months later, after being raised to Master Mason, did you wait until you join an appendant body, any appendant body? And I found the old adage of, well, wait a year or two to be kind of true, which is really neat. Most of the respondents waited 12 months to join an appendant body. And then half a year, waited 1 month, 2 years, 3 years, etc. Okay, well, that's cool. So we know how long it took them. Question?
What about people who stayed strictly Blue Lodge? Is that statistically?
That would be your zeros. Yep, good question. Yep. Next up. Back up. Okay, so cool. That's how long you did it. Was it too fast, too slow, just right? So I asked them the Goldilocks question. Was it too early, too late, or just right? What was the length of time between your raising and joining your first body? Was it appropriate? Those who thought it was just right, in that long category in the middle, 3 out of every 4 of those said, it was just right. I took all of those numbers, those people who were satisfied, laid all those out, and the median and mode was 12 months. So with data, we now can say concretely that when someone's like, well, how long should I wait until I join an independent body? 1 year and you'll be happy. Question?
Sorry, relating back to the previous slide, can you please confirm that of all the respondents, only 5% of Masons are not members of a concordant body?
I can't confirm that. What I can say is that I opened this survey up for entered apprentices and above, so they may not, they certainly aren't there in their journey yet, but that's certainly what it looks like.
That seems impossible. 95% of Masons are members of concordant bodies.
Of any appendant body. That could be Eastern Star, it could be anything else, right? There's only the respondents, right? Yep.
Doesn't that seem impossibly high?
So I do know that I've talked to S. Brent Morris about some of this stuff, about the trends of the Southern Masonic jurisdiction of Scottish Rite and comparing that. So I do know for a fact that about 2 out of every 3 Masons join Scottish Rite, or at least in the Southern jurisdiction. We have the data to show that. So.
Just anecdotally, I would suggest that I think you would find, certainly in our Grand Lodge in Canada, in Ontario, I think that number would be significantly higher. Of Masons that are not members of.
That are not members. Okay, interesting. Could be true. All right, next. One more. When we talked on the concept of religion, I wanted to see specifically, how active are you in your religion? And I found that using a standard Likert scale, which says 1, not very active, to 5, very active, show up all the time, kind of have a wide spread there. However, if you ask the same question of how spiritual are you, we see that many of the respondents found themselves, they self-identify as very spiritual, but not very active. All right, so we can't just measure someone by their attendance rate at their worship service as their quality of being ready to receive kind of the philosophies and spirituality concept of Freemasonry. Interesting. And it's almost, a direct inverse correlation between the two. Next. Yes.
You didn't ask for the correlation between spirituality and active individuals.
Correct. I did leave it up for interpretation. That's a very good point. I didn't define it and say.
It might not be inverse at all.
Right, and I can actually go back and look at that data. That's a good point. Yep. Were you a member of a youth group? Right. Specifically, do DMLAs become Masons? And looking from the outside in, meaning only interviewing Masons, how many of you were DMLAs before joining? Only 1 in 9 were actually members of a youth group prior to joining. This does not take into account, I should have then also asked a similar question to the DMLAs. Of all the DMLAs, how many of you went on to join Masonry? Because those numbers could be different. Okay? But if this is, Masonry's youth, Masonry's future, don't have a whole lot of information about the return on investment there. Okay. Next, which appendant body means the most to you? Shocker, it's the big ones. About 1 and 3, enjoy the Scottish Rite, followed by Royal Arch and the Shrine, and you can see the rest there. That's the breakout. So people join appendant bodies and they join the big ones. Next. Do you consider yourself to be active? Remember, this survey was sent out online, shared on Chris Hodap's blog, put out on podcasts. So these are guys who are already looking for Masonic information, so it doesn't surprise me that most of them said, yeah, I'm active. I like this whole Masonry thing. But 1 in 10 are not. Next. Okay, so if you're active, how often do you attend Blue Lodge? 1 being never, 3 being sometimes, 5 being I go to every lodge meeting. You can see over half said, yes, I'm there, I'm active, I'm there at every lodge meeting, ready to go. And see another, 25% or less most of the time attending lodge. Next. Okay, so how far away? It's just another random question I asked. And good to see. Lodge is close, which probably makes it easier to attend, which makes it easier for them to be active. And I could then go look at that data and say, of those inactive, is your lodge farther away or not? Next. But this is the breaker, guys. Did you find what you're looking for? Left it open-ended. And for every one of these data points, we also ask them to do the why, right? We have free text that goes into this. It's a lot of text, and so, it takes time to dig through that other than just the numbers. But what you're seeing here is almost 1 out of every 4 Masons haven't yet found what they're looking for in lodge. They either know for sure they didn't, or they're not sure. That's a huge problem, guys. 1 out of every 4 customers doesn't know if they like the product you're selling. And then we wonder why the non-payment of dues has been pretty flat. Okay, next. And this will come up later because I'm really worried about that 25% or so of those disengaged brethren. Next up, let's talk about Masonic education. My favorite part is, okay, tell me, how important is Masonic education to you? Wow, almost 70%, almost 90% if you add the 4s and 5s together. Yep, they really want their Masonic education. Next. Okay, where do you go for your Masonic education then? Number 1 in 3 Masons, go to lodge. That's good. That's a good thing. Then of all the other ones, they go to lodge, or they go read books. They go to lodge, or they go to appendant body meetings. They go to lodge, or print blogs online. Lodge, study groups. Are you seeing a trend here, guys? They're going to lodge first, in addition to all the other, extra reading material and research that they do. In fact, all of these, the top 10 here, had lodge as part of that for where they go first for Masonic education. Okay, that's good. So we should be providing that information to them, right? Next. How often does your lodge provide a Masonic education program? Remember, 5 is always. 1 is never. 3 is sometimes. Now that's interesting. But wait, I can slice the data back. So remember that 25% or so, or that weren't sure what they were looking for? Let's go see how often their lodges provide Masonic education. Wow. We found a smoking gun. Right? And the good news is I have gone back and looked at just those members, and that is a common, qualitative theme that they said, yes, I'm not finding what I'm looking for in the lodge because I'm looking for spirituality, philosophy, education, research, history, all this stuff, and not getting it. And we're letting them walk out the door. Next. Some other things we want out of lodge. I just broke the lodge into different sections. Next. Again, 1 to 5 scale from not very much to like it a lot. These guys want esoteric research and discussion. I left it open-ended for what that means. I also asked next from the ritual. They really like the ritual. They like the study. They like proficiency for those states who do it. Next, brotherhood and camaraderie. boom, knocked it out of the park. That's what we're all about. I'm glad to see that's what the brethren are getting out of this. This does back up some data that I talked to the Grand Lodge of California back in the fall. They said absolutely the same exact thing, that the camaraderie, the brotherhood, the fellowship is exactly the value proposition that we're giving and they're getting. So that's good. Let's keep doing that. Next. How about food and festive boards? Meh. You know, we can take it or leave it. But that's good because now we have some data to say just having a better meal may or may not draw their attention. Okay. Next. We do love the history of our fraternity, so that shows as well. And next. Higher degrees, it's interesting to see that they can kind of take it or leave it in the sense that we're not bringing in guys who are trying to be title chasers, right? Or to try and just jump to the next thing, We're joiners, absolutely, but we're not as fascinated with, not as involved with rushing to the higher degrees than we are with the brotherhood and camaraderie, right? Interesting. Next. All right, so what can we do about it? We've got all this data, now what? Okay? Most importantly, first up, we really have to go and really survey our craft. This was just one guy on a pirate ship that was asking guys to help out a brother and get this data together. We did have, about almost 2,300 respondents, which is statistically significant, for a fraternity of about 1.2 million members today, which is good. But again, it's better if your Grand Lodge really sponsors this and really digs deep in a lot of these same questions and more, because it's all about what do you want to learn. I hope to get like another survey out here in a little bit when I'm not busy running around. But if you're a member of a Grand Lodge, hint, hint, or if you know someone who is, really get them to go interrogate the craft right now. Because, again, these non-payment of dues, looking at the data, and I didn't put it in this slide deck, but it is in the book that I'm selling downstairs, so go check that out, where we're almost at a 1-to-1. For every one new person we're getting raised, one's walking out the door. That's awful. All we're doing is spinning our wheels, and that does not count people who are leaving due to death and all that. So we're actually losing more than we're gaining, as shown by that slippery slope in the beginning, but we can do something about those who are walking out the door.
Do you have this information? Sorry, you said this already. Do you have this information together as a form that you can give to the different Grand Lodges so that you have like a kind of ready-made, something to be tailor-made further, but do you have that you can email out like a PDF or something like that?
All right, that's a great question. So I'm not going to expose the raw data because we do have a lot of sensitive things in here about sexuality and salary and all that. And I made that as a promise to get make sure people understood that. But to put these slides out there and everything, the questions themselves. Oh yeah. So the questions were done in Google Forms, so it's easy to just copy that, and you have a brand new data set. And yeah, I'd love to work with anyone from your Grand Lodges to just give them that and say, here, just ask your craft this right now. Easy to do. It collects all the data for you. Easy peasy. But again, me being just some guy, I can't talk to another Grand Lodge and get them to do it. They won't listen to me anyway. Question?
I understand not sharing the raw data, but do you have any sort of like just higher level sort of aggregate data that kind of summarizes your findings that could be somewhat useful if we wanted to say make our own graphs?
Sure, right. Yeah, so again, I'll be making these slides available online soon. And I also have some data from about March of 2016. I did a talk at the Grand Lodge of Pennsylvania. They did a PA Academy of Masonic Knowledge, and I have that on YouTube as well. We can talk, afterwards, and I can see kind of what you're looking for. Because again, I have it all kind of laid out, so I'll be glad to share what I can. That'd be good. All right, next. But part of that means we actually have to be able to make sense of that data. We have a lot of smart people in this fraternity that do some data analysis, and so it'd be cool if we had like some sort of fraternal data scientist group or something like that could actually look at this data. I got a couple of nerds in here too, which is great. Is that because we need to be able to make sense of this data, right? Charts and graphs are great, but you need this story like I'm doing here to explain what's going on. because you can't make a decision by saying, okay, well, that bar graph is 2% taller. Now what am I supposed to do, right? We need to be able to analyze this data so we can actually make action. Charts and graphs are pretty. I'd rather see improved results over time, okay? And finally, in case you haven't figured out from my themes, that really, next, education is critically important, right? Give them education now. Because that's what, of those who are disengaged, they're not getting it at their lodge. And we're letting them slip through our fingers. Next one, last one. If you like education, there's a podcast out there called the Masonic Roundtable, free to everyone. But that concludes my presentation, guys, and I would love to answer some questions or be available to mull about. And if you miss me here, you can go downstairs, and the Masonic Roundtable has a table there as well to just bend my ear. I'd love to talk to you. Thank you very much.